Welcome to this very special Reconciliation Week edition of our podcast, hosted by the Settlement Council of Australia. I want to start, and this is particularly important for me, to acknowledge country. I know that those of you that will be listening and watching today will come from many, many parts of Australia, and there are many lands that we wish to acknowledge. Right now, I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people here in the western suburbs of Melbourne, but for our office in the ACT, I want to acknowledge the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. This year's theme for Reconciliation Week, of course, is Bridging Now to Next. And it calls on all Australians in their diversity to reflect, renew, and recommit, to learn from the past as we walk together towards a just and united future. I can't tell you how honoured I am by the prospect of this extraordinary human being joining us today, Belinda Duarte, a proud Wodjabuluk and Dja Dja Wurrung woman, a leader whose life's work spans culture, sport, healing, justice. She's a board member of Reconciliation Australia and the CEO of Culture is Life, a not-for-profit deeply invested in strengthening cultural connections of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Belinda, I heard you speak recently at the breakfast launching the Reconciliation Week. Your presentation, your speech was so powerful. You talked about how culture grounds us through adversity. You talked about the role of storytelling, the role that community leadership has in truth telling. Where does this come from? Tell us a little bit more about you, because the depth of that speech spoke to me and the 200 people in that room so profoundly. Hello, Belinda.
Wow, thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. I just feel very privileged to be here and have a yarn with you here today, Maria. I too want to echo the acknowledgement of country and say Doc, thank you. Doc Mawal Belinda Duarte. I'm on the traditional lands here of the Ngunnawal Wullam people of the Bunwurrung, and extend that acknowledgement to the countries across this beautiful country we call Australia. And say I'm really privileged to just spend some time in this space with you, given my family's story, the ancestral story of both sides of my family, which I'm extraordinarily proud of. A lot of people know me for the work that I do with First Nations people and as a traditional owner here in Victoria. But not so many people know the story of the other side, on my father's side of the family, and the journey that they've taken as well, and how in so many ways this conversation's really appropriate with Reconciliation Week. So I'm not quite sure where you want me to begin.
Begin from the start. Tell us about that story, because it is one that I'm familiar with, but of course so many others would not necessarily be familiar with.
No, thank you. A shout out to the ancestry that is on this podcast and listening in to our conversation, because I have realised as I have grown up how essential your sense of self is and your well-being or your wellness is in really fully recognising your story and your ancestral stories and who you are of and what that means and who shapes you and who raises you up. And there's so many different versions of what family looks like nowadays, and all of them in their difference, I think, are really beautiful and essential to talk about. But what I will do, I think, given the audience that we're talking with, I do want to acknowledge my dad, my tata, and my babcha, my father, my grandmother, and my grandfather. and the story that they went through as Polish refugees. My grandparents were prisoners of war in World War II and were in forced labour camps in Germany. And the story that I have really, spent a lot of my life, unfortunately, after my father died, I realised there was a lot of stories I didn't know. There was a lot of stories Dad didn't know. And there were stories that were too hard to be told by my grandparents, given what they'd been through. But not so long ago, I decided, as my uncle would call me, as a nosy magpie, to do the work and discover, what happened at that time and how can I reconnect, the stories and the experiences of my family that is connected to my Polish family. At that time, I was in oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to kill that. I didn't mean that. I thought it was completely off.
It could be the ancestors calling.
It may very well be. Yeah, they're with us, actually. They're really well and truly with us.
Always.
Yeah. But a long story short, when I was in a former role, I requested to find the files of my grandparents and father through Red Cross. And at that stage, I was told that there was a waiting list of at least 2 years, 2 to 3 years that it could take for them to find their files. Because both my grandparents passed away, my only living Polish aunt, she was born in Australia and, she was much younger, so didn't necessarily know all the stories either. Anyway, before I finished this job, I think it was a week out, and a week out of finishing, the file landed. And I decided I'm going to go to Poland and I'm going to go to the locations that I know about at the time of year that my father was born and try and seek more information on this journey. And through the woman that I was speaking to at the time, trying to apply for dual citizenship, she guided me through that process. And then she said, "You can't go to Poland and not reconnect with your family." And I said, "Well, I don't quite know where to start." And I'd finish up these files land. It was the only email I had left in this job, so it was the ancestors fast tracking that. There was a whole heap of files, some that were in Polish, some that were in German, some that were in English, and started to get connection points around locations of birth, like sort of birth locations, camps that my grandparents had been in and my dad had been in. And the woman at the time said, "Tell me more about your family, what you know." And my auntie had said, "Look, I have these names. Many years ago, we had had contact, but we lost contact because we didn't know we don't have an address, we don't know where to start." And at that stage, because Facebook was quite significant, still is today in a different way, but long story short, this beautiful Polish woman, she researched and found the names and families and said, "Write a letter, I'll translate it." And bang, with a 2-week turnaround, my family had said, "Yes, you that's us. That's absolutely us. And would love to see her. Would, in fact, as true Poles do, there's no way she's staying anywhere else except with family." And it was one of the most restorative experiences I've ever had in my life, because I saw reflections of, my family on that trip, even before I got to meet them. I could see my dad's behaviour. I could see the things that we grew up doing as kids that I didn't even realise were a really Polish thing to do. Yeah, so my father was born in, I really thought that I'm sorry about that
Not
distraction.
at
I put
all.
it on aeroplane mode, and why it's still dinging, I don't know. Um, anyway, just with the research, I
Yeah.
found that my
How,
father
how,
was,
how did that sit though? Because the strength of your mother's story alongside that, you
yeah,
growing up in effect with both. I mean, you talk
yeah,
about culture in
yeah.
such a powerful way. How did that sit for you?
Well, for me, it brought me so strongly. Like there was always such a deep love for family and for both my mother and father. So my mum, at the age of 4, was removed and put into an orphanage, and as was part of the stolen generation and affected by that. My great grandmother, um, on mum's side of the family, had spent so much time trying to get my auntie and my mum out of the orphanage as stolen gen, but because of the policies of the day, um, they refused. They refused her offerings when she had a job, when she had a place for them to live. The racism was really strong. And I think about my father's story of being born. He would have been 6 weeks old. I did the maths on the file when that camp was freed. And when I discovered that the Americans had come in and they had shouted, "We love you, you are free. We love you, you are free." Um, the recognition of how um, humanity can really attempt to, dehumanize, and at the in the mildest case, in the worst case, the acts of genocide that's happened to families and communities across the world. And in this country, the act of genocide to First Nations people and both sides of my family. Um, it's really, really, it was very confronting. But in understanding and knowing the truth about both sides of my family and restorative practices of reconnecting to anything from cultural practices on, my Wotjobaluk or Jardurung side, or the cultural insights and knowledge of what my family went through and practice in Poland. And what their story is really deepens that sense of who I am. And it gives insight to, you know, what it is that keeps me well and what it is that keeps people well. And I think, one of the things that's not talked about as much in mainstream is really the importance of, cultural wellness and, multicultural communities. And in so many ways, it's easier to translate that to the stock standard Australian, for want of a better word. Um, they they understand uh, what practicing um, cultural gatherings, cultural events, cultural ways.
Mhm.
It's really, it speaks to the genetics of who you
Mm.
are of. And displacement from homelands is the common thread between both sides of my family.
Mm. And I often hear leaders in our multicultural communities talk about that sense of cultural responsibility, which is often why I think they tend to be a little more attuned to the stories and the truth that's required with First Nations. Is there a relationship here that you think we can build on? I mean, reconciliation, you're on the board of Reconciliation Australia. And it feels feels to me like it's a real genuine invitation, isn't it, for multicultural communities to tap into their own cultural responsibility and journey and take on the necessary obligations that come with being on this land.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard a young man express it so well. And, he talked about the learning of, as an immigrant, he realized that he was the benefactor of the dispossession of this land in itself by being able to come here and be present as a part of this nation, that there has been, the benefits that come with that at the cost to First Nations people. And I think about the day again, in the sort of exploring of backgrounds and the likes, is just how, when I looked at my citizenship papers of my grandparents and dad on the January 26th, the complexities of that document in its own right were really quite profound for me. And that's why I see my role in this space as really essential. And it's not one or either. It's not how much or part. I am Wotjobaluk. I am Dja I am Polish. It's a really interesting thing how the history of this country has influenced the psyche of us as Australians. And it's so important for us to continue to recognise in our diversity and cultural stories, therein lies the beauty of our country and the space in which an intimacy can be held and had in that difference. And the care and recognitions, particularly from the communities that you're working with, being more informed on this really, I think, can be transformational for members of the community in their own right. Understanding more about the land thereof, the story of those people, what has been the Australian War's experience here in this country, and how is that actually, the research has shown there's been more people killed in this country than have been lost over the entirety of wars served outside of Australia. And we recognise that on Anzac Day. And yet, again, not every Australian actually understands or knows that story. There's massacre sites all over this country. There's been wars fought that need to be told. And I guess this, you talked about it earlier, the truth-telling piece and understanding those critical stories. It's a place in which collectively communities can heal. And there's examples of that all over the world where they've done that quite well. And part of my visit to Poland, that's what I did. I researched where and how and what things they had in place around education to ensure that healing occurs and that we take those lessons for the generations to come. And, I
And
hope we can
healing
do
is
that.
possible. I mean, often, again, people in communities say to me, but what can I do? I came as a newly arrived person. What can I do? And you've just told us, inform yourself, embrace the truth, invest in the time that it should take to get to know the land that you're on, and listen deeply to the stories that are being told to you by the oldest living culture on this earth. You're obviously incredibly I suppose, powerful in the way that you talk about the potential for healing. If there is one thing going forward, Belinda, and particularly thinking about you being on the board of organisations like Reconciliation Australia, to settlement agencies, because we grapple with this idea of what does settlement look like on unceded lands? What does settlement look like in a country where treaty is yet to be signed with the First Peoples of this land? If there's one thing you think going forward that you'd like to say to providers, to communities in the work of multicultural and settlement services, what would it be?
Look, there's there's so many places to start, and I often encourage people to really take that time to invest in areas that they are a part of. So whether it's a community they're a part of, an organisation that they're a part of, sporting organisation, work, um, an area of interest in art, for example, or dance, and do that exploration in areas that where you are already connected. Um, Reconciliation Australia is an organisation, as is the state bodies for each of the organisations across the countries, that anybody can reach out to those state bodies in the reconciliation space and ask, where are the committees that are around here. There's local committees in local councils that specifically work in the space, that if people want to get connected, they can. Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week are two primary weeks within the year where there's a lot of activity, and all the evidence shows is, one, we learn more when we have relationships with our mob, and when we actually spend time with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. No surprise there, as it would be the other way, right? So taking that time out to, get amongst the activities, and where you're unsure, just keep being curious, keep asking, and be patient. Continue to extend invitations and share in time together. And, those relationships, we are a relational people. Understanding what that means is easy, really. It's kind of, when we spend time together, we know more about each other, and investing in a relationship that has the intention to connect, and support and nurture and build reciprocity, is something that I've seen in so many ways, whether it's gatherings over food, gatherings over dance, expression through art, or moments of significant dates. I think about Federation Square and some of the work in the Melbourne Arts Precinct that is evolving, and the programming is pretty spectacular around our communities here in Melbourne. So seek and take action, because, as I said the other day when you were there, we can't afford to continue to accept things as they are. There won't be the change needed in order to create equity in this country. And, the experiences of disadvantage, trauma and hardship, something that is not unfamiliar to settlement communities and the multicultural community. So with that insight and awareness, I think they are extraordinarily, equipped to navigate this space much more easily than a lot of other members of our community, just purely because of difference in, coming to a new country and exploring with a different approach. So, yeah.
Belinda Duarte, very powerful, powerful words to end on. Can't thank you enough for your generosity. What an incredible human being, and how blessed do we feel to be able to share this space with you, particularly during a week where I know that you are so, so busy. Thank you for making the time for us at the Settlement Council of Australia and our members. Thank you for reminding us that it's never a linear process, that it's relational, that it's always about a movement, a living relationship, as you explained, one that is connected to each other, but to truth and the importance across generations and cultures. I'm reminded it's 25 years since Corroboree, and I actually attended. I'm much older than most of us in this room, but what you've really, really reminded us of is just how important it is that our paths are guided by the voices before us as much as they are of those that are coming ahead of us. Belinda Duarte, so grateful. Thank you for your time.
Maria, in true, diverse, multicultural roots, I want to say doggy dog from my Wotjobaluk nation, and I also want to say Jankuya Bardzo. So thank you very much. And I look forward to catching up again. Take care to everybody out there listening, and good luck with Happy Reconciliation Week.